Welcome tonight to the Toronto Debating Society. It's January 8, 2013. This is a regular parliamentary debate with points of information. Our resolution for tonight will be public health must trump personal freedom. The Prime Minister for this evening is going to be Margie, and she will speak to us now for 7 minutes.
In New York City in 1907, an Irish cook by the name of Malin was taken from her workplace by the police and placed into custody. She insisted she had done nothing wrong and she had broken no law. She fought for her freedom for 3 years and was eventually released. She changed her name to Brown to avoid further harassment from the police and returned to work. 5 years later, she was rearrested and detained until her death 30 years later. Her case was sensationalized in the newspapers, who dubbed her Typhoid Mary. And while a cook, she had caused the death of at least 3 people and infected a further 50. Public health must trump personal freedom. Public health is the approach to medicine that is concerned with the health of the community as a whole. Must trump means must override. Personal freedom, the power or liberty to order one's own actions and property. The reason why the police arrested Typhoid Mary had to do not with any existing laws, but with what we would call the social contract. When we get together as a group, as a society, we make certain agreements, and those agreements are usually an agreement to do what is best for the whole community. And that is usually determined by a cost-benefit analysis, which is often you can actually put in real numerical terms. And it's also the protection of the vulnerable in that society. Yes?
How many people were there living in the United States of America in 1907? The materiality of the 50.
The 50. I don't know. Thank you. So the 3 examples that we wanted to discuss when it came to why public health must trump personal freedom has to do with the cost benefit of doing that in the sphere of healthcare and protecting the vulnerable. And we chose 3 examples to illustrate this. The first example being vaccines, the second example being environmental protection, and the third example being quarantine. So in the first example, vaccines, how are they a benefit to society overall and that it outweighs the cost? Well, we're going to look at childhood vaccines, for example, MMR, mumps, measles, rubella, meningitis, and the diphtheria, tetanus, and pertussis. Pertussis is whooping cough. These actually kill people. It's easy to forget. And they still kill people around the world. And these kill people who are not even able to become vaccinated. These are our vulnerable populations, babies who are too young, the people with compromised immune systems, sometimes the elderly. So therefore, society has an interest overall for everybody to say we're going to do certain things to safeguard the health of society overall. And if we have to insist on vaccinations for everybody in order to protect society as a whole, we'll do it. And we have even found that there are actual cost benefits to that. Some numbers from the Centers for Disease Control in the US, for every $1 spent on a DTaP vaccination, it saves $27 in healthcare costs, lost work, premature death. Same goes for the MMR. $1 spent on that vaccine saves $26 for society as a whole. And as I said, it's not just the individual. It's not a situation where, if I get sick, it's my own issue, right? So what we have here is a situation for society as a whole. We have to worry about herd immunity. We have to worry about vulnerable populations that are not able to get their vaccinations and protect themselves that way. So as a society, we say, we're going to do this to benefit everybody. That's what we do when we buy into it. The second, which is environmental standards, actually have a bigger legal footing. Typhoid Mary was actually detained under questionable legality, but we really have nailed down environmental protection. And there we've actually quantified it as, well, the EPA in the US has looked at the Clean Air Act and found that it's probably going to save about $2 trillion from the time it was enacted in 1990 to the time to 2020 is the span. And they've already had a huge benefit of about 85%. So the amount of money spent comes back many times, and that's a huge investment. Again, we're saving vulnerable populations, people vulnerable to pollution. And it does cost an individual, absolutely. We're not saying it's cost-free. We're saying the benefit is such that it must be considered more important. So again, there are huge paybacks. As I said, like 85% is a typical number. There are lots of special costs. Again, we were looking at things like premature death, days of illness, disability, and so on. And then finally, the last piece is quarantines. And that is, again, a question where there's some legal issues that we as a society must come together. Quarantine is so important in order to contain an epidemic and keep it from becoming a pandemic. And unfortunately, even now, an attempt to quarantine within a country, sorry, Mr. Lindo, yes. An attempt to quarantine can only happen in between countries legally. There's nothing that prevents, if there's an outbreak in Toronto, from me flying to Vancouver, and we should consider as a society that's a problem. When SARS occurred, there was technically a quarantine in Toronto, and yet I flew out every week for business to the US without any hindrance. These are things that we as a society need to put more emphasis on and really make sure that we're prepared for the eventualities where we need to do things like enforce vaccinations, enforce quarantines, enforce environmental protections. And we need to agree to this as a community because that's part of our social contract. So my suggestion is that what we do is we really put some laws in place and understand that public health must trump personal freedom. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Prime Minister. Now it's the leader of the opposition, Astrida. She will have an opportunity to explain her position. She will speak to us for 7 minutes as well.
Leader of the opposition, I'll target your quarantine issue first. When's the last time we've had to contain North America in any manner such that we've not had flights from Toronto? New York, we haven't had any such event in the last 50 years. As for environment standards, the Clean Air Act just doesn't cut it when the government has other options. The government could ensure, for instance, that all houses were smaller so that we don't have these massive houses to heat and to air condition. Now, that would ensure cleaner air at a faster rate, same like we could have municipalities with no vehicles except transit vehicles. Study the transit systems of North America. New York, Los Angeles, Toronto, Vancouver. Extensive, reliable, reasonable, 24/7 transit systems. So then the Clean Air Act is just a petty step towards moving towards clean air. If they really cared about the population, they'd target massive issues such as, go ahead.
I'm sorry, are you arguing for stronger government intervention then?
No, I'm not. I'm just refuting the point that the government is doing a good job with the Clean Air Act. It really doesn't play a part in public health, actually, if we look at the options available to the government as a whole. As for vaccines, vaccines, once again, are just a form of labeling the population. When someone gets arrested, they actually ask you, do you have any marks? That means your family didn't understand health care. So, given the fact that we've not had whooping cough or any other major outbreak for a long time, vaccinations are really a method of controlling the population in a form of label versus making sure the population is healthy. Now for my argument. The Prime Minister defined public health as approach to medicine. Well, medicine means your social, physical, and mental well-being then. The government becomes a dictator, actually, or yes?
Are you aware of how many babies died from pertussis last year in Canada?
I don't know what pertussis is.
Oh, sorry, whooping cough.
Whooping cough. No, I'm not. And once again, that's a statistic, so I'll just add that that could also be a story, because the healthcare practitioners are not effective world leaders and don't think through the government or don't think through their own lives on a daily basis, so then the Canadian government could put out statistics to enforce their agenda. But if public health has to trump personal freedom, then we'd essentially eliminate all restaurants, because public health is your physical body. So then we should get rid of the Tim Hortons and the McDonald's, pizza and hamburger joints, because they cause heart attacks, strokes, and those are the leading causes of death in North America. Now, once again, if public health has to trump our personal freedom, we'd actually eliminate permit events. So you're taking away the life, liberty, and freedom, the Charter of Rights that the population was given. Because we could always say public health means that the citizens of North America, Canada, are not contributing to understanding the constituent parts of the earth, so we could invent. They're playing, having fun, so to speak. That's too strong of a tool to put in the government's hand. My third argument is the government would eliminate many of the patents that are currently in existence. For instance, ice cream, sausages, jam, the cream we put in our coffee, sugar, butter. Many of the metals cause us problems. Plastics, known to be made with mercury. So then if public health must trump personal freedom, we'd actually downsize the Sears and the Canadian Tires and the Walmarts. And cleaning products actually wouldn't even be on the shelves. Your common Ajax has a warning, let it irritate your eyes and your skin. 3M has a stainless steel cleaner and polish, and it says that it can cause skin and eye irritation, and if you inhale it, it can be harmful. My final argument is we would eliminate the freedom of choice. For instance, even in prescription drugs. If you're not on a court order, you don't have to take a prescription drug, even though a medical practitioner has given you a prescription. Well, there's so many adverse effects to prescription drugs if you study them that there should be a choice. I just don't want edema. I don't want a headache. I don't want a rash. You know, so then it's important to have a choice. Life is an information highway, and the people who know how to get themselves through life shouldn't be bogged down by the mandate of the Public Health Department. What's the motion? Against the motion?
Thank you, Astrida. Now it's time for the seconder of the government, Adrian. He will have his opportunity to make his point.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I'm first going to talk a little bit about some of the arguments and comments made by Astrida, and then I'm going to talk just some new arguments and give some background information. Okay, Astrida was talking earlier about traveling around and there was an outbreak, and the last time there was an outbreak was SARS, is what I have. You know, people talk about some of the side effects of some of these medications, but you know, there isn't like a great linkage between the two. The brain damage occurs in 1 out of 400 infants for whooping cough. Government, you know, it said government limits patents in ice cream, sausages, jam, metal, and they went on to talk about some other stuff, about getting stuff in your eyes. But you know, we have stuff even like in the workforce, where we have WMIS and workplace hazardous material information systems, where these things are being used to protect people and help them. You know, even the idea of freedom of choice, but there is a certain limitation because we do have to protect them. Okay. I'm just going to give you some background information, and I'm going to give you some arguments. On February 20th, 1905, the Supreme Court, by a vote of 7-2, ruled that the right to refuse vaccination wasn't guaranteed by the U.S. Constitution. Writing for the majority, Justice John Marshall Helen argued that in the arena of public health, societal good must trump individual freedom. Much of the words of our motion. The liberty secured by the Constitution of the United States to every person within its jurisdiction does not import an absolute rights to each person to be at all times and all circumstances wholly freed from restraint. There are manifold restraints to which every person is necessarily subject to the common good. Society based on the rule that each one is a law unto himself would soon be confronted with disorder. My first new argument to introduce is, any question?
Shouldn't there be sufficient examinable evidence before the Public Health Department, for instance, ever intervenes in any situation?
Yes, it do. Okay. As I said, my first argument is that failure to receive a vaccine can result in others being harmed. Hillary Clinton once said, "I understand that it's scary and that getting vaccinated is a leap of faith. The battle starts when one person's choices affect other people, and that's not being a responsible member of this community." On October 2009, Stephanie Tartell, elementary reading specialist, published on Slate.com an article where she had to send her child to daycare, and the daycare had children who were unvaccinated. She said that ordinarily, I wouldn't question others' parenting choices, but the problem is literally one of live or don't live. While that parent chose not to vaccinate a child for what she likely considers well-founded reasons, she is putting others' children at risk. In this case, the child at risk was my son. He has leukemia. The next point is that there are many financial aspects to immunization. and my partner elaborates some on that too, but there was also a report the city government produced by David McEwen, the Toronto's Chief Medical Officer of Health, and in a report called The Inequalities in Immunization Rates in Toronto's Killed Children. And in that he suggested many changes, and it wouldn't cost much money. The Ontario Immunization of Schools People Act in 2004 is currently in place. That's the main legislation we have in our schools today to encourage immunization. It protects 6 diseases. Thank you. Please vote for the motion.
Thank you, Adrian. Now the seconder of the opposition, Adrian, will have an opportunity to speak to present his position.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, ladies and gentlemen of the House. The government today has brought forth a resolution, a motherhood resolution, where it's talk about babies and societal good. What this actually is, and don't get me wrong, what this actually is the tyranny of the majority. What it comes down to is, to what extent does the government have to curtail your rights, to curtail your liberty, to curtail your freedom in order to do something that it thinks is good for you or good for society? That is the question which is being asked. That is the question that is at the heart of the resolution. And the government has come forward and said, well, society this and society that. And we agree that society does obviously have an important fact to play, but the majority does not imply good. The majority does not imply something should happen just because a lot of people think it should. The majority does not imply that just because we want something, it should be done without any consideration at all to the rights and the choices of the minority people. Its societal need is not enough to override personal liberties and people's rights in every circumstance. In every circumstance. This is the question that we have to ask ourselves. Individuals have rights, including the right to be left alone, the right to do what is appropriate for our own bodies. And the government has come up and said, well, vaccination is good. And again, it's, vaccination is good. This is all good, so it has to happen. And we would like to remind the House not to be...
Did Typhoid Mary have the right to infect 50 people?
Typhoid Mary had the right to live her life and not be arrested because she had a disease she had no control of getting. And that is a nice segue into a quote that I picked up from, unbelievably or not, a Star Trek episode. Star Trek Voyager. And when they locked me up, they were saying the individual's rights will be protected only so long as they don't conflict with the state. The individual's rights will be protected only so long as it does not conflict with the state. Nothing is so dangerous to a society. And the government has said, well, because it's good, but you know what, public health, we don't know everything about everything. Mistakes can be made, and there are legitimate reasons why people have the right to dissent, why people have the right to say, no, I don't want to do this. I don't care if it's good for public health. I don't care if it's good for society as a whole. I still have a right to not participate. And one of the classic reasons why they have that right is because the government may be wrong. For example, in the 1950s, for example, I'm sure there was a famous doctor to allow a medicine to be prescribed to that it wasn't tested enough, and the drug manufacturing companies and whatnot said, no, it's okay, it's good. It will make you feel better. It will make you healthy. It will do all sorts of wondrous things. So you should take it. Everyone should take it who needs to take this drug. Unfortunately, the drug was thalidomide, and we all know what happened to the babies who the babies whose mothers had taken thalidomide. So what the opposition is saying is that societal good is not enough to curtail people's rights. It is not enough to curtail people's rights, people's choices in every single circumstance. It is not enough to override, say, the rights of religion to refuse a vaccine. And to close, another quote from a good science fiction movie, Men in Black. And I paraphrase slightly. 1,500 years ago, everybody knew the Earth was the center of the universe. 500 years ago, everybody knew that the Earth was flat. And today, we know that everything the government tells us in the realm of public health is good and healthy for us. Imagine what we'll know tomorrow, end quote. For these reasons, we beg the House to oppose the resolution.
Very interesting. Thank you, Adrian. Now the leader of the opposition and the Prime Minister will have an opportunity to summarize and shore up their positions. They will speak to us for 2 minutes. First, the leader of the opposition, Astrida.
Before any government can be given that much power, evidence has to be provided to the population. Sufficient evidence that we would all make the same choice that the government makes for us. Otherwise, we're being railroaded as a population. We're not participating in the country and the world that we live in. So then public health must trump personal freedom, has to be defeated as a motion. Because personal freedom is important, and we're not sure if the government is right, nor is the government when we're navigating new territory. And we all have a right to do what we want with our own time. Health is, and medicine does encompass our physical, social, mental well-being. And just because Typhoid Mary happened and 50 people died, the United States of America should not have to suffer. There's no mention of typhoid in the other countries. And how little are we as compared to the rest of the world? For instance, the United States of America is 400 million people currently to the world's population of 7 billion. So we're only a drop in the bucket. So then maybe the United States of America should have brainstormed benchmarked with the other countries to find out why they weren't having typhoid. What was really at the heart of the typhoid issue? Our rights as citizens, our lack of participation with the government. So I beg that you defeat the motion that public health must trump personal freedom.
And the final speaker is going to be the Prime Minister, Madam Prime Minister, speaking for 2 minutes.
Public health must trump personal freedom. Now, the opposition has largely availed themselves of the slippery slope argument. If we make some rules about vaccines, where does it end? We'll all be forced to live in very tiny houses. What we're suggesting is what Hillary Clinton said, as my partner mentioned. It has to do with when your choices affect other people. That's where the societal contract comes in. We're looking at evidence-based situations, evidence-based enforcement of the social contract, where we're looking at cost-benefit analysis, where we're looking at the protection of the vulnerable, far from being the tyranny of the majority. We're looking at protecting some of the most vulnerable people in our society. Even the Supreme Court of the US has stated that there is no right to refuse vaccination because public health was more important. And I'll even go so far as to say that the vaccination thing is not necessarily even a majority view at this point. There has been a lot of misinformation, and it's the situation where society as a whole must enforce good decisions even when there are rampant rumors to the contrary. So it's not a conflict with the state. It's actually a question of people causing danger to other people. And I don't mean just an inconvenience. I mean people can die. Lots of people can die. People can suffer brain damage. People can suffer disability. It's a real and meaningful thing. It's not trivial. And we as a society, as a group, have decided that it is important for us to enforce certain standards and certain norms in order to protect people, in order to make our society a better place. And when we do that, we may infringe on some personal liberties, but we will, as a whole, benefit as society. And even the individuals themselves may benefit against their very own will. So we would like to remind you that public health must trump personal freedom and ask you to support the motion. Thank you.
Thank you everyone. So this has concluded the first part of the debate. Please welcome Dean.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The debate before us this evening was public health must trump personal freedom. And I just want to say first off that the most important part of a debate is getting a definition out that can be used and for the government side to present arguments that can be argued against and also boosted by the government side. And we did get that this evening. The definition was well done as far as defining the specific terms, and Margie, the Prime Minister, came out with 3 points that could be used as a framework to start the discussion as far as the arguments and the evidence went. The issue of vaccines, environmental protection, and quarantine within the context of public health. In conference with my co-adjudicator outside, I just want to stress as well that the public health issue was not lacking. The personal freedom issue tended to be more lacking in the general context of the conversation this evening. And the idea of the importance of personal freedom and how it's impacted by and how it influences public health is something that probably could have been fleshed out even more with very specific examples by both sides. So I just want to come out right up front and say that. So we started off the debate in a sort of a storytelling fashion as opposed to the sort of 1, 2, 3 number. That's not a problem. It got my attention with Typhoid Mary in New York City in 1905. And the idea was what were the issues facing the United States and the city at that time, and how could that be brought into today's world in today's context. So the issue of vaccines and whether or not you as a parent or you as a school board or you as a society or recommend them or enforce them or encourage them or demand them was discussed in terms of the cost-benefit analysis. So public health, the agency that is public health within a public sphere, a city or a country, looks at that and says, as was stated, for $1 it costs to vaccinate someone, according to the Centers for Disease Control, you get $27 worth of fewer deaths, less healthcare cost, less lost days at work and the like. So there's a context there that can be used. As far as environmental protection, it was sort of a general statement that was made about the Clean Air Act and sort of a general benefit. It's sort of the touchy-feely, all right, it sounds nice and you know it's true, as opposed to saying, now it was stated that yes, it saves $2 trillion and an 85% benefit to date, but again, how do you quantify that specifically, that I, driving my car to work, can understand? And you, riding the bus and coughing in the exhaust of my car, can also understand. The The issue of quarantine brings in the context specifically of personal freedoms, but again, the issue of personal freedom, as my co-adjudicator and I discussed, in the context of Canada, is protected by the Charter of Rights and Freedoms, and that was never referred to specifically, just once actually, briefly, but in terms of what you're allowed to do and what you should do and what the government says you ought to do and what the law says you should do and the like. And I will say that the opposition did sort of touch on that they implied it. They implied it through the discussion that was made. But again, the issue this evening was what specific examples could be used. So the issue of AIDS, for example, or HIV in the 1990s, and what effect that had on personal freedoms for people, and as well as public health. And how did the agencies respond, people respond, society respond to that? Forced sterilization in the 1950s of women who had mental illness or were deemed socially unfit. That's another issue. So government decided, well, we're going to do this. So these are issues that would have, I think, helped bring out strong conversations and discussions and more debate than was visible tonight. It was a sort of an easygoing public health issue as far as the discussion tonight. And again, it's not that facts weren't in evidence, it's just facts in the context of public health and the context of personal freedom weren't clearly defined and clearly articulated, I think, within a context. So, back to sort of my concrete examples of where this happened. The government came up with the three arguments and summarized perfectly within the 7 minutes. The leader of the opposition was, in my mind, was more miss than hit as far as the arguments that came up. There was an attempt to address the arguments in a bit of a way, and then a couple of new arguments came up with public restaurants and discussion of certain foods that would be discontinued or disallowed and the like. But I think that didn't really stress the issue of the personal freedom and public health specifically. The secretary for the government came up with a couple of examples. A child sent to daycare with other children not vaccinated. That was one issue that was brought up. The U.S. Supreme Court. And we didn't set a context of where this was. This is Canada, the States, New York City was mentioned, but public health and personal freedom can take any sort of a picture. And you ran out of time. So try to sort of concretize it more specifically. Also, when you're addressing, not just you, anyone, say, Madam Leader of the Opposition, Mr. Seconder, and the like, as opposed to using personal names when you're doing the debate. Very quickly, the Seconder for the Opposition came up with a very strong sort of comeback. The motherhood resolution, majority does not imply good, not in every circumstance does public health trump personal freedom, or the government know best. Government might be wrong, thalidomide and the like brought up, and the Star Trek and the Men in Black quotes were fun, if nothing else, and used to prove your point. Points of information, I will say that the Prime Minister did very well at asking and answering questions. The other three speakers had a difficult time, and it appeared more confusion was a result, which is good as far as the person asking the point of information question, not so good for the person being asked. So be aware of what's being asked and coming up with a quick answer. The summations, the opposition side was fairly weak, unfortunately, in terms of coming to a final, this is what we said and this is why you should vote for us. The government side was stronger, more reinforcing the ideas that were put forward as far as the arguments and evidence previously stated. So, all in all, an interesting debate, not a particularly strong debate, unfortunately. There were a lot of avenues that could have been followed that weren't, unfortunately. And the final score was the government 35 and the opposition 24.5.
Investigator?
And the investigator was Adrian. on the opposition. Adrian, number 2.
There are trophies.
Are there trophies?
I don't think we've got trophies right now. I don't know where they went. Oh, no, we do.
Apparently we have trophies. So, government side,
Are you sick?
no.
We don't
Okay.
see.
We know it's Adrian, number 2, from the opposition, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. So this will conclude the debate for tonight, and I will.
The public vote too.
Oh, yes. Yes. Okay.
Interestingly, the government won the popular vote too by a vote of 9 to 4.
Okay. So thank you everyone for a very good debate.